about, interviewing and all the changes going on there just from COVID and people working remotely and, all the craziness we've all experienced this year. And so I think as you go through the process, remember that, it's new for you, it's new for the person on the other side as well. So just, have a little compassion and understand that people are trying to get things right. Just like I look like I'm in heaven today because I have a window that's high and behind me in my office. And so if I were doing an interview, I probably wouldn't do it from this office, but the camera can never keep up with the light that comes in behind me. So today I'm going to talk about the CPA exam, something I'm sure you're all quite interested in, and a bigger project called the CPA Evolution. So let me go here. I am going to start and just kind of walk you through a history of the exam, just to give you kind of an idea of how it's changed in the past and kind of the time frame that those changes have happened. And then I'm going to talk about the CPA evolution process. So the profession as a whole has gotten together over the last few years and talked about the exam and what needs to change to kind of bring it in line with practice. And then I'll wrap up by talking about the 2024 exam. So the CPA evolution process has evolved the way that the exam works, and we expect that new exam to be rolled out in 2024. So that's my presentation just kind of in a nutshell. So we'll start with a history, and the first CPA exam was administered in 1896, so a very, very long time ago. In New York. So New York was the first state to license CPAs. They created an exam to, make sure that people had the right knowledge. One of the jokes is always one of the pillars to get your license is experience. And so somebody has to sign off, write a letter that says, you've got this many hours of accounting experience. And so how did that first person get licensed? There was nobody that could sign for them. So in 1896, we had the first exam. Then in 1917, so 20 years later, the AICPA created a standard exam. So between 1896 and 1917, there were a number of states that had their own exams, their own rules. So if you wanted to move from one state to another, it was very much like being an attorney today, where you would move to the new state, you would have to take their, version of the exam to be licensed. And, that's a huge pain. It limits your ability to move around a good bit. And so in 1917, the AICPA created this standard exam. It wasn't until 1952, so that is, 35 years later, that all the states got onto that standard test. So it took quite a while to make that happen. And that a lot of the states have wording about the exam written into their state law. And so it has to be a legislative action to change those things. So, but then from 1952 until about 2004, which is a little over 50 years, the test was fairly consistent. It didn't have any major change in that time. The big changes in 2004, there were two. The first is the test became computerized. So when you start working either in a firm or a business and you meet other CPAs, if you meet a CPA that got their license before 2004, they will remind you how much harder it was when they took the exam, because it was paper and pencil. I think it was late 70s, early 80s where they allowed you to bring a calculator. And so the people that took a pre-calculator really love to tell you those things. And I've told each group this: you will inevitably join that group. So you will start out and you'll hear these people talk about, oh, the exam was so hard when I took it. And you'll be like, oh God, the exam was so hard when I took it. And then, 5-10 years from now, it'll change again and you'll meet new CPAs and you'll be like, oh, you've got it so much easier than when I did it. It's just one of those, it's part of being a CPA. So don't fight it. The other thing that changed in 2004 is we added testing windows. So prior to 2004, the exam was given twice a year. It was 2.5 days long, and you took all 4 parts. And so unlike today where you sign up for one part and you go and you take it, you get your results. If you passed it, you move on to the next one. You didn't do that back in 2003. In 2003, there were 2 dates on the calendar, and it was 2.5 days. You just went, you took off all the parts. If you passed something, the next time you went, you didn't take that part, but it was still, you know, the parts were scheduled. And so you had to be there, you know, for whatever parts that you needed to take. So the next big change was 2018. That's when, again, there was a big software upgrade at that point, and Excel became available. When I tell, you know, fairly young CPAs that, you know, the people taking it today can use Excel, they're like, that makes it so much easier. And I'm like, no, it's testing different things. And so the fact that you've got more tools doesn't make it easier. It just means that some other skill is being tested. This summer, another big change took place with continuous testing. And so the testing windows were taken away, and now you just have to wait to get your results on one part of the exam. If you didn't pass it, you can immediately schedule it and take it again, take the same one again. In the past, before this summer, you had to wait for another testing window to open, and it was complicated and cumbersome, and it was always one of those things that I ended up explaining to, you know, a dozen people each year because it really just didn't make any sense. And so we got rid of those. Those are gone. Now you get your results and you either move on to the next part or you take the same part again. So then the next major change will come in 2024 with the CPA Evolution. And these are, I like to point out, this slide has like big changes. These are not, you know, little updates. These are big changes. But throughout that same time, the exam does undergo a lot of scheduled small changes. And that process is called practice analysis. And so I put up here at the top, this is the normally scheduled updates to the exam. So every 3 to 5 years, the AICPA looks at the role of newly licensed CPAs. And so CPAs love acronyms. The newly licensed, that's NL, not NI. I always think it's a little N, big I, but that doesn't work. If you Google that, you don't get anything. But they look at newly licensed CPAs. So they go out and they interview the people that are hiring them, the people that are managing them, the folks that are doing the training for them. And they talk about, you know, what are the things that make a newly licensed CPA successful? You know, what are you seeing that is great? What are you seeing that they're lacking a little bit? And they use that feedback to drive changes in the exam so that the exam better matches what folks are looking to hire and the skill sets they expect from a newly licensed CPA. So again, the most recent one was completed in 2019. The recommendations they have from that, I have a slide on that next, but those recommendations will be integrated into the exam next summer. So July of 21, these changes will be, you know, baked into the exam. So what were the things they learned this time? The first one is understanding business processes from inception to completion. And this is one that many of these, they're kind of on a constant, you know, they're ever increasing in importance. If you go back in time, you know, CPAs at one point were really just general ledger focused. You know, we're not looking at anything beyond the GL. But over time, that continues to expand because we recognize that it's important to understand the whole process, understand the things that go into these decisions and these journal entries. And so the exam continues to add more and more of that stuff. The same with digital and data analytics. You know, it's just constantly growing in importance for CPAs. And those skills are being used earlier and earlier in your career. This next one threw me a little bit. Increased reliance on SOC 1 reports. And this somewhat relates back to that first one. A SOC 1 report is looking more at the whole control environment of an organization. It looks at risk assessment, control activities. It looks at the information and communication, make sure that the information that's being distributed internally is correct and trustworthy. And so more and more, those are the types of things that CPAs are doing. And so it's important that the exam reflect that. This last one, this terminology, focus on critical knowledge and skills, it's always on the list. And it's just the way that AICPA terms the things that have either grown in importance or that have kind of faded away. And so I have a slide on that as well. For the starting in summer 2021, the difference between US GAAP and IFRS is being removed from the exam. So if you got in a time machine and you went back, 10, 15 years, US GAAP and IFRS were working on something called convergence. They were trying to get their standards to line up with each other. I guess it was probably 5 or 6 years ago, they said, nah, that's not something we're interested in anymore. The funny thing is, if you look at the pronouncements after that date, after they said, no, we're giving up, they're continuing to get closer and closer. And so GAAP and IFRS, they continue to grow closer, but that difference is moving away from the exam. Another big one is taxation of estates is being removed. And so if you really love the taxation of estates and you want to, answer a couple questions on that, you need to take that section of the exam before next summer. The next one, increased focus on sourcing and testing of evidence. That ties back to, the whole accounting system and looking at that. And the last one, continued increased emphasis on analytical skills and problem solving. That's never going away. Every time we do a practice analysis, it's just going to get more important. The other thing that's not on the list, that when they initially came out with their recommendations, one of the recommendations was to get rid of governmental auditing. And when the profession saw that, they were like, no, you can't take that out of the exam. It's not an area that a lot of newly licensed CPAs work in, but it is very important that newly licensed CPAs are aware of it and understand how it works and how it's different from, corporate or nonprofit accounting. And so governmental accounting will stay in the exam. So related to the practice analysis, a couple of dates to be aware of. The new exam blueprint will be published by the end of this year. If you have not looked at the blueprint, I highly encourage you just Google CPA Exam Blueprint, and it'll take you to one of the AICPA pages, and you'll see this PDF. I believe it's a couple hundred pages, but you don't need to read the whole thing. If you skim through, there are sections that show you how much weight is given to different topics in the exam. And just as you're preparing and thinking about the exam, it's very helpful to look at that and just be aware of, what it is. And especially when this new exam is coming out, if you're studying and preparing, when that new one comes out, take a look at it so that you can see, hey, if there are sections that you want to try and either delay until after, next summer, or rush to try and get done before next summer, that would be the time to do it. And then again, the updated exam is expected to go live July 1st of 2021. July 1st is a typical cutoff date there. When we went to continuous testing, it also started July 1st. So just as you're going through the process, be aware of that July being kind of the date. So now I'm going to move to the CPA Evolution. I put in red words up here, major shift. And so practice analysis is that, continuous thing that we do to make sure that the content of the exam is right. The CPA Evolution is a marked change. It's a huge, huge difference in the exam. And so I just kind of wanted to quickly, talk through the timeline on that. The discussion started in January of 2018. There was an initial concept that had two pathways. So there was a traditional, kind of what you're doing in a technology pathway that required fewer accounting courses and had different parts to the exam. I put a roadblock there. Nobody liked the idea. It was an initial concept. I'm almost sure that even the person that wrote the concept didn't like it. It died pretty quickly due to just, everybody bringing their pitchfork and be like, no. So then in November of 2018, the AICPA and NASBA came together and formed a working group to kind of talk through, hey, what are the big things that we're trying to accomplish here? And in February of 2019, they released a set of guiding principles. So there were 5 principles. It was probably like 300 words. It was very wordy when it initially came out. And they brought that to, the profession. It got revised there in the spring of 2019. And we got to, in March, we got to a set of principles that everybody generally agreed to. So then in October of 2019, the model was released. And the second model was very different from the initial concept. And it very much reflected those principles that we talked about. And so in the spring of 2020, both AICPA and NASBA agreed to move forward with this new model. AICPA is the national association for CPAs. They promote and protect the profession. NASBA is the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. So each state has a regulating entity that bestows licenses, and their job is to protect the public. And so all of them get together and form this group called NASBA. And then for the exam or any big change in the profession, those are the two entities that really need to be on the same page to make something happen. And so in spring 2020, they both approved this new model. And we expect that in 2024, the test will go live. So why are we doing this? Why are we making a big change? And so as you look at the body of knowledge that a newly licensed CPA is expected to have, if you go back just to 1980, so remember, the exam goes all the way back to the 1800s, but if we just go back to 1980, so relatively not that long ago, the IRS code has 3 times as many pages, there are 4 times as many accounting standards, and 5 times as many auditing standards. And so as you think about the exam, the exam is covering all of this, and so if that knowledge is growing, the exam has to cover more. We also see that the firms are looking at newly licensed CPAs differently. So if you went back again, if you go back 5-10 years, a lot of the work that a newly licensed CPA was doing then is now automated. It might be offshored, or it could be performed by either a paraprofessional, or increasingly, what has happened is interns do this. And so when you do an internship, you're doing the work that 5-10 years ago was done by a newly licensed CPA. Those that work has shifted down, and so what it really means is then the newly licensed CPA is expected to be doing the work of somebody that had 3 to 5 years of experience 5 to 10 years ago. And so that's that again, we're expanding that body of knowledge that you're expected to have. And again, adding to that, we're expecting newly licensed CPAs to do more critical thinking, use professional judgment. You're solving far more complicated problems. Again, you have to understand the business processes. You have to understand, the systems, the controls, all of these things. And then data management, add that into the mix. And a newly licensed CPA, just the amount of knowledge has really just exploded in the last, 40 years. God, 1980 was 40 years ago. But the exam has stayed the same size. And so the big question is, what do we do? We've got more knowledge, but we've got this exam that's stayed the same size. And so we had a few options. The first was to kind of stretch it out. And so, this waters down the license because you're not as, your knowledge isn't as deep. And really the candidates then know less about what matters most. And so this option just didn't work. The next one, I'm sure you guys will all love. The next option was just let's make the exam bigger. And the big problem with that is this bottom one, it's unsustainable. I would say it would be unsustainable today, but then as we know that these things are going to continue to grow, very quickly you get to the point where if we kept growing it as the information in the profession grows, you'd quickly have an exam that by the time you learned enough to pass it, you'd be retired. It would be a barrier. Many people would say, oh my God, the exam's getting harder. I'm out. I was barely there before. I'm definitely out now. So that one went away. And that led us to look at some options. So the first one was referred to as the CPA Dash. And so looking at the credential and saying, hey, let's people specialize, let's specialize the credential. The problem with that is that the CPA credential, the real value in it is that people know that CPAs understand all of this. And so if you're an auditor, you still need to know the tax implications of the advice you're giving. And the same way, if you're a tax CPA and you're advising a client, you don't have to be an expert. You have to be aware of the audit impacts of these decisions. And that's the real power of a CPA, is this broad, rounded knowledge about the accounting. And so if you take the credential and you segment it, you lose that thing that is really core to the CPA. And so that idea got pushed away. The next one was to just create a two-tier system, make it so that, it's a longer process and, you become a CPA light and then later in your career, you become a CPA. Again, this one was pretty quickly like, nobody likes it. It's confusing to the public. So NASBA doesn't like that idea. And just in general, it's not a good approach. The next two, medical and legal, they have a lot more education required and just a bunch more hoops to jump through. And again, we're like, we don't want to be them. Let's get rid of that. And so where we landed was an engineering model. And if you're not familiar with engineering, as I wasn't, it works like this. And so you go to school and get an engineering degree, and then you take fundamentals. You take an initial, core exam on engineering broadly. And then you go out and you work and you come back and do a specialty. And so one of the things, probably the scariest thing I learned in this whole process is that professional engineers they do one of the specialties, but then they're not limited to that. And so, the example I always use is somebody could have passed the civil specialty, and then, later in their career, they can sign off on a nuclear project. That to me is a little scary. But much like the CPA, it's built on a credential and competence. And so in addition to having the PE, you also have to be competent. And so, the example I use was structural. If you were licensed and you pass the electrical portion, and then you go out and you sign off on a structural plan, and then that building collapses, they're going to go and they're going to look at the plan, they're going to see your signature, and they're going to know that you signed off on that, and you're going to expect to be able to prove that you are competent to do that. The same is true with accounting. And so if you sign an audit, you are signing both that you are a CPA and that you're competent to sign that audit. And so realistically, it's the same concept will be applied here. And so here is the CPA version. Far fewer outer ring specialties, but it has a core of accounting, auditing, tax, and technology. And then there are 3 outer ring specialties. And so as we look at this a little deeper here, there's a strong core. The CPA is still about knowing accounting and auditing and tax, but we recognize that technology has a very large role at this point. That's only going to continue to get bigger. And so you'll have the strong core, and then you'll add deeper knowledge in one of the 3 disciplines. The nice thing about this is it reflects the reality of practice. And so if you look out there, there are very few CPAs that do audit and tax work. Most have specialized, or they specialize in consulting. Again, it doesn't mean that they don't know about the other. It just means that they're far more knowledgeable in that area than the other. Another thing we like about this, this option is it can be adaptive. It can change over time. As this was released, one of the first questions was, will there always just be 3 specialties? And the answer was no, it can change over time. And so we expect that, eventually there'll be 5 or 6 outer ring specialties. But it will continue to maintain that one CPA license. And so when people after 2024 take the exam, they pass the core and one of these outer ring items, they still become a CPA. They don't become a CPA Dash tax compliance and planning or something else. They're still just the one license. And it also, it's not limiting. And so you can take the exam, specialize in one of these 3 rings, one of these specialties. And then if you decide later in your career you want to change, that's an option. You're not locked in there. The accountancy board is not going to publish which portion you pass. So right now you can go and check and see if somebody's licensed. In the future, when you check to see if somebody's licensed, it's still just going to say that they're CPA. It's not going to say anything more than that. One thing I want to point out is the number of parts in the exam and the general amount of time to take the exam will stay the same. We don't know exactly what that is going to look like just yet, but we do know that it'll be a 4-part exam, and you will also be able to take the parts in whatever order you choose. And so unlike the engineers where you do your core and then you do a specialty, with the CPA exam, you're going to be able to do your specialty earlier if you so choose. So let's say that you are going to go into tax. You can take whatever the core that's most focused on tax. Again, at this point, we don't know what that core is going to look like, but you could take that core part and then right away go and take the specialty. Since you're going to have a really strong foundation at that point in tax, go ahead and take the other part of it at that point. And then you can finish off the other parts to complete it. That was a big deal. It was something that that everybody just kind of melded to and liked. And so, what are the big dates and things to expect with just the exam in the future? So, July of 2021, the practice analysis gets incorporated. Between now and 2024, expect the details on this evolution. And then in 2024, the evolution exam will start being live in the real world. One of the questions that's often asked is, well, what if I'm starting to sit for the exam in 2023 and I get, 2 parts and then this new exam comes out? And we don't know. We do not know the answer to the question because those rules aren't out yet. But what we expect is that it will follow the current guidelines. So today, if you pass a section of the exam, you then have 18 months to pass the other 3 parts. At the end of those 18 months, the part that you passed will roll off. It's only good for 18 months. If you end up in a situation where you're coming up on 18 months and you need a little more time, you can apply to the accountancy board for an extension. That's something just as you're going through the process, if it drags on, that's important to know. That prevents you from having to take apart a second time. But we expect the same thing will happen where at some point when the crossover happens, they'll say, okay, you've got 18 months to wrap that up, or you're going to have to shift to the new one. And so again, that's not written in stone anywhere, but that is what we expect. With that, that is the end of my presentation. I am going to stop sharing my slides. And if you have any questions, just you can either type them in the chat, or if you want to just unmute yourself and ask your question, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. All right, I guess we don't have any questions. I hope this was helpful, and we've been telling all the groups that if a question pops into your head later, feel free to email or call or do whatever. Molly and I are always here and available. If you have questions, even if it's 2 years from now and you're sitting for the exam and you've got a question, that's what we're here for. We're here to help you through that process, and then once you're a CPA, we're here to help you through that journey as well. So thank you for your time this morning, and have a great day, everybody. Molly, did you have anything? Oh, you're welcome, Samantha.
I didn't. Oh, sorry, Samantha, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you guys.